So hello everyone, I'm just waiting there for another few minutes for a few more people to come online. So we'll just wait there for a few minutes, and well done on being so prompt. We'll start shortly enough. So good evening everyone, and we will be starting very shortly. I'm just 1 minute past 7 there on my clock, so we'll just maybe give another minute to people to join online there shortly. So thanks for coming along this evening, and you know, for being here. So we'll start maybe in 2 minutes and look forward to the presentation ahead for the evening. Okay, so I think we'll start this evening, and again, good evening to you all, and thank you for being here. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk with you about my learner ID this evening, and I think from the infographic you'll get an immediate sense of the key goals of the programme. And tonight I'm just presenting an overview of the programme. There will be some webinars on after Easter directed at specific class levels, and I will give you those details later on. So just to, I suppose, start into the presentation and to consider, you know, what is learner identity? The series itself is called My Learner ID, My Learner Identity. And so the idea or the concept of learner identity, I just wanted to talk with you briefly about that this evening. So it's a new idea, it's a new term and a new kind of a construct in education. And I suppose if you can imagine learning as a flowing river, On the surface of the river, you have the specific subjects that we identify as valuable, that we encourage children to engage with. So our subjects across the curriculum. Below the surface of the river, we've, different forms of expertise that children have to be able to understand and to discuss and to engage with knowledge and information. So they have to have language skills, they have to be able to, receive and understand language, for example, and things like that. In the very depths of the river and the space that's harder to see and understand, but really that underpins all learning, is actually learner identity. And it encompasses the attitudes, the habits that kind of influence learning and the ways children come to understand themselves as learners. So the purpose of education, we now know and have known for some time, isn't just about the transaction of knowledge. But I suppose the thinking today is that the purpose of education is very much around the construction of identities, that will bring children and serve children positively throughout their journey in learning in life. So as teachers, we have to ask ourselves, well, what can I do that could positively affect the children in front of me and their sense of themselves as learners? So if you think about, I suppose, why it's important, a child with a positive sense of learner identity, that's a child who can tackle and persist with the challenge, a child who has a sense of agency in learning, a child who's motivated about learning, a child who understands themselves as learners and who knows how to learn, if you like. And we know from our experience of COVID and from the world we're living in that we have to equip learners with the capacity to be able to deal with those ill-defined problems that come at them and to be able to see things through and be able to bounce back. So, and our learners require that ability to be able to do that over and over and over again. So it's really important for 21st century living, for skills for the future, that children can learn, unlearn and relearn. So learner identity is all about the promotion of self-determination in learning, and it's regarded as one of the key goals for 21st century learning. And in fact, if you look at the redeveloped curriculum that's coming our way very shortly from the NCCA, you'll see one of the key competencies underpinning that new curriculum is learning to be a learner. So it's all about promoting learner independence, responsibility and ownership, and it's critical really for enabling children to become learners for life. So it's very much about learner empowerment, and that's that construct of learner identity. So then we have the series, My Learner ID. And, the stimulus for My Learner ID really came about from practice, from working as a teacher, an educational psychologist, from being a parent, from working in teacher education. And the goal here is to link theory to practice and to offer a tangible framework to schools to be able to nurture children's learner identity. And the first thing we need to be able to do is to teach children the vocabulary associated with learning to learn and learning how to be a learner. So we need to be able to give a shared language frame and vocabulary about learning. And My Learner ID really is about helping children learn how to learn. So it's about giving children that language about learning that makes, if you like, the capacity for children to be able to learn that bit more smart. So really, it's very much focusing on putting children in the driving seat of their own learning. So My Learner ID, the series itself, it's an evidence and strength-based whole school approach to empower children learning to be learners and to enable them to become a well-equipped, knowledgeable child around learning how to learn. And it's about filling that gap, that deficit in education that for centuries we actually haven't done, which is about equipping children with the language, with the skills and the strategies to learn how to learn. And it's really about putting the child at the centre of this learning and really promoting and supporting learner responsibility, learner ownership and learner independence. So that's what the series is about, and its goals, I suppose, are very central to the bigger agenda in education these days and the bigger agenda about serving children for the next few decades, and having sufficient flexibility, creativity, problem-solving capacity, adaptability. The big things that we often find very difficult to measure in education. It's about aspiring to those things. It's about delivering to that agenda. So why is it relevant in an Irish context? Well, it really is really relevant in an Irish context. If you look at any of the policy documents that are on the go, from the school self-evaluation framework to the learner wellbeing framework to the transitions document to assessment documentation, it's very much the messaging and the policy and the vision is really to equip children with skills for learning for life. So my learner ID is really about that. It's about, generating holistic, authentic learner profiles. So one little girl in a school using my learner ID and caught on the little video there where children talk about my learner ID to other children, compares her experience of doing my learner ID to kind of creating a biography of herself as a learner. So it's that opportunity to give children the space and the voice to become aware of themselves as learners, to consider all of those facets that make them, a successful, a struggling, a challenged learner in the school system, and then to equip them with skills and strategies and opportunities to be able to help themselves move on in learning. So it's really important when we think about the records that we keep on children, that we consider, authentic, holistic records that look at learner empowerment and just not the flat scores of achievement, that we bring a bit of balance to report cards, that we bring a rich picture of the learner to the parent-teacher meeting, and that when we ask, often at tokenistic levels on student support plans, for students to contribute to how they understand their learning in those support plans, that we actually have equipped them with the language and the skills and strategies to be able to do that. Because for many children, they simply can't. They wouldn't know how, they wouldn't know where to start. So it's really about generating that rich picture of children going through the school system as learners, their journey through education, that learning journey, how they understand and construe themselves, and equipping them also then with the skills, with the language, with the vocabulary of learning how to learn, learning to be a learner. So it also, my learner ID very much supports the vision for education, both internationally with the OECD framework for 2030 for education, and here in Ireland with the school self-evaluation framework. And you're all very familiar with that at this stage. The statements of highly effective practice within the Looking at My School document, and it supports well in excess of 30 statements of highly effective practice from that. There's a school principal there on one of the videos, one of the testimonials, that talks about the recognition from the inspectorate of the contribution my learner ID made to so many of the statements of effective practice and highly effective practice in his particular school. So it has been acknowledged, it has been recognised as contributing very significantly to moving on and shifting on, our understanding of learning, really centering it all on the learner. So very important from that point of view. It also offers a very practical, inclusive, universal design learning framework really for implementing this programme in schools. So this is about the personalisation and customisation of learning. It's not about getting things right or getting things wrong. A lot of the methods underpinning my learner ID are open-ended. They invite the perspective of the learner. They don't lead the learner to a particular right response. So it's a very inclusive kind of a concept and programme. And indeed, one of the schools back in the early days of the pilot of this two and a half years ago in County Clare pointed out that for her in her classroom, it was a fantastic programme for children to get to know each other, particularly where there were language limitations or cultural variations, where opportunities to stand in the shoes of that child sitting beside a child was possible through the use of my learner ID. So really very important. And as I say, for progressive and forward-thinking schools, they're right there with the redeveloped curriculum, where learning to be a learner is one of the new 7 competencies underpinning the redeveloped curriculum. So my learner ID supports these various strands, really supports the idea of tracking the development of learners over time. Again, it's looking at process here. It's looking at the process of becoming, not what children have become, not looking at standard scores, enriching and embellishing our understanding of children by looking at all of those other aspects, the lower layers of that river that contribute to very effective learners in classrooms, that contribute to success in classrooms, and that contribute to children feeling empowered around learning in classrooms. So very important to kind of, I think, embed that within school practice and to try and develop that in terms of educational practice as we move on. There's a huge contribution also from My Learner ID in contributing to children effective lifelong learning habits. So we'll be looking at the programme in a second, and part 2 of the programme really looks at developing children's learning ways. So it looks at developing those effective learning approaches, managing attention, understanding memory, managing organisation, and what does that mean to the child, and how does that work for them in terms of being organised or memorising effectively. What does it mean in terms of strategies that they can choose for themselves to help themselves around learning? So very, very helpful in that regard, and also very helpful to, you know, substantially again enrich, I suppose, the information set and data set we give to people at transition points around children. So, you know, we have that transition, we have the transition information that we give from primary to secondary, but it's very limited really in terms of what we really send on. There isn't a rich picture of the child as a learner, you know, their strengths, their motivations, their successes, their challenges, the strategies they have for learning that work for them, the challenges they have for learning, the goals they have in learning. We don't have any of that information. We have very global descriptive summary information that often just captures school achievement really. So it's looking at, I suppose, broadening out this and looking at you know, the greater goals of education and equipping a real sense of learner competency and learner empowerment in that process. So just the key competencies, you're probably aware of these. They were introduced there by the NCCA late last year before COVID hit in, and there is the intention to introduce the revised and redeveloped primary curriculum, I think later on this year. 7 key competencies underpin this new curriculum. It's a new vision for education for Ireland, and one of those key competencies is learning to be a learner. It's this idea of learner identity and the nurturing of learner identity within school systems. So what's in the series then? So at the moment, the series is developed from 1st class to 6th class in both Irish and English. And at each of the class levels, you have a pupil record book. And you can see there, that's the 1st class and 2nd class pupil record book. And that's owned by the pupil, and it's maintained as part of their assessment record. And it's completed by them. It reflects their learning journey, if you like, in 1st class and 2nd class and across the school year. It's not corrected or marked by the teacher. There are pages to be done at home and shared at home, and there are supportive lesson plans and planning materials available in the teacher resource book that I'll talk about in a minute. But so you have the pupil record book and the evaluation booklet. This little evaluation booklet accompanies the pupil record book. This is maintained by the teacher at the beginning of the year for the end of the year. And the small little record book here, it's a double-sided, 2-sided A4 page, has the strategy wheels inside and makes a record and holds a record of the strategies that children have selected for themselves in the particular learning ways that are explored in a particular year group. So, for example, in 6th class, organisation and metacognition are looked at, organisation and thinking about thinking. And organisation is broken down into planning, time management and study skills. Metacognition is broken down into logical thinking, decision making and evaluation. And there are a number of strategy wheels and strategies worked through with examples and tasks in the books for 6th class for children, so that they can practice these and then apply them and then generalise them to their learning. And they can pick a strategy from the strategy wheel and show a preference for a particular strategy. So it's not a one-size-fits-all, it's a child choosing the strategy that best suits them. And a record of that is maintained at the end of the school year in the small little evaluation booklets. These appear as if they're the same size as the books, but actually they're half that size, they're just A5s. And they really give a very useful record of the strategies children have selected for their learning across the school year. This is also embedded in the Aladdin system, and it's possible to generate a report on it and that as well. So there's also then the teacher resource book for each class level, and that is also available as an ebook, as far as I'm aware. And there are also videos available, teacher implementation videos that go through each class level and explain it on a video. So the videos, I think, are about half an hour, maybe 40 minutes long, and it goes through the My Learner ID for that particular year group. And then there are the classroom strategy wheels, and the classroom strategy wheels are very necessary, really, to offer a prompt to teachers and to offer a prompt to learners to use strategies throughout the school day. So My Learner ID isn't just another kind of a program. This is, an approach to nurturing educations for life that needs to be, I suppose, fully embedded in school systems at a whole school level for it to work at its very best. And when I introduced My Learner ID a few years ago in County Clare, 2.5, 3 years ago, the schools that have kept with it and have really embedded it into school practice has made really a substantial difference, because you can hear children, apart from the measurement associated with the pre and post impact of the programme, you could hear children talk about strategies that they use in their learning. And that is the goal here, that we move from illiteracy around learning and how to learn to literacy levels, vocabulary, capacity to actually talk about effective learning strategies in learning. That each child can be enabled to do that. So the strategy wheels, as the posters there, they're very useful for the classroom, they're very useful for SEN rooms, and they come in the pupil books as well as small stickers that can be put into homework diaries to connect with home and to, also, I suppose, scaffold parent learning here. And to enable parents be participative if they're capable and interested and willing to do so, and be supportive of helping children to learn as effectively as possible. So they're the strategy wheels. Teachers have also said to me that they have found the strategy wheels really useful. Many of the teachers who've done the online training program on My Learner ID would say they've had to equip themselves and upskill themselves in learning how to learn, that it isn't something that is part of their training program, and that they feel that they have to have a sense of it as well. So the strategy wheels really serve a purpose and a function for that. This is the second class book, and the first class book there focuses on imagination. So with part 1 of the program, part 2 of the program, and part 1 really looks at the who of the learner, and part 2 of the record book looks at the how of learning. And I'll actually go through that in a minute in any event, so I'll hold my fire on that for a second. The third class book you may be familiar with, because when I started to develop the series a few years ago, I started at third class level. And so the third class book, I suppose, has been out there for 2 or 3 years, whereas the other books are more recent. It is the intention to develop the series to the infant level, and that's in development at the moment. And the books are available as Gaeilge Mishmar Alamore, and indeed was funded by the COG board for the translation into Irish, and express my gratitude to the COG board for that funding at the time. So this is, the third class book, the fourth class book, just to give you a sense of perhaps the visual on it, the 5th class and the 6th class. And I worked very hard to make sure that the presentation of the series represented the developmental stage of the child, because this concept is something that's owned by the child. It's their worldview, it's their ideas, it's their it's the representation of themselves in this. So just bringing it back to the younger years, for example, the artist involved in the creation of My Learner ID actually used materials, physical materials. So it's cardboard on the house, for example, so it's cardboard on the school there, for example. It's, real materials that she used for each of the illustrations within the book. So she's very much a process artist herself. So there's almost a sensory feel to the actual pupil record books, and that's hugely important because you've children responding to this, owning this, and really taking great pride in this being a reflection of them. And so very much an open-ended but very textured, very sensory kind of feel to particularly the earlier years. As we move up the years, the graphics kind of move with the learner, and the idea with the graphics is to reflect that developmental stage. So, the hot air balloon, the idea of taking off as a learner and empowerment and learning. Same with the climbing frame, the overcoming struggles and challenges in learning that you'll often see with the children in playgrounds as they master that top end of the climbing frame. That kind of more certainty in development, developmental theory would say children becoming more aware of themselves and others, be prepared to maybe, you know, challenge a bit more, ask those questions of why, and really, you know, perhaps challenging a little, and the graphics perhaps representing that, and the sophistication of the 6th class student and all that goes with the at least apparent sophistication that we have when we get to 6th class and when we're standing in the shoes of the 6th class student. So really there's a lot of thought in My Learner ID. Each page was thought about very, very carefully and created in a way that would really invite in the world of the learner. And I suppose it's come from my own experience of sitting down with children, working with kids over the years, and, you know, having very detailed reports from all the people working with children, parents, teachers, you know, professionals, but not really having a sense of actually the journey of the experience of learning or the school experience from the perspective of the child. And when you would talk, and when you do talk to children, they really lack the literacy around being able to talk about anything to do with learning other than school achievement and subject achievement, and maybe, you know, things they like to do in school and teachers they like, but very illiterate around actually the skills and strategies associated with learning. And, you know, I've had a study published on that, and the Teaching Council has funded another study looking at children's understanding of learning and being learners. And that's a study that's been launched there after Easter, and that will be going out nationally to all schools. But that illiteracy around learning is very evident, and it's about empowering children around that. And to do that, we have to be able to invite in the child to really understand this isn't just another book to be filled. This is in fact a record, a live record, a biography, if you like, as mentioned by the little girl in that particular school, of themselves becoming and being learners. There's lots of video material to support My Learner ID. The website www.mylearnerid.com is there at the moment. It is actually undergoing revisions, but it's fine. It's still live at the moment, and all the videos are there. There's a very short video there introducing My Learner ID. There's a parent information video that I think is very helpful for parents. There's a lovely video for children by children, and I think that is the essence of the messaging here. It really is centred around the child, and I think the children in the video there in school in Cork and in Ennis and County Clare really articulate the programme and the, you know, concept of the programme from their perspective in that video. There's also implementation videos for each teacher at each class level that's available, and there's also then a video there on linking policy, vision and practice, joining the dots, which looks at how school self-evaluation maps onto My Learner ID. And that has been used in some schools as a Croke Park Hour video. It's a very, very powerful video. It's definitely worth having a look at, and it's up on the website there to review. Eamon then is my puppet up here. You'll meet Eamon. He's the teacher's helper. And during COVID and during lockdown, we were needing, I suppose, to connect and feeling we should connect with learners using My Learner ID, and indeed anybody who wasn't, about, you know, the skills and strategies for learning. So I recruited Eamon. I knew him. He's a puppeteer living not too far from me, and he's the teacher's assistant. And I managed to recruit a very talented young teacher as the teacher in the video. And there's a few powerful lessons there on memory in the classroom, on metacognition in the classroom, decision making, for example, for 6th class, working memory, I think, for 5th class. And then there's another video lesson on attention. And they're really, they're possible to just work, you know, to use in your classroom and to see how children respond to them. They're required to do activities as the video goes, but it really brings home the messaging of what the series is about. And I suppose if you're interested in My Learner ID and what it can do in your classroom, I'd suggest start with actually the video, start with Powering Up Learners, start with Eamon. It's our intention as well to you know, accredit schools who are using My Learner ID at a whole school level, and Eamon will be the person conferring the digital sticker for that purpose when we get to that point. because he's very popular with children and really emphasises, I suppose, the meaning of the series very clearly and connects very well. So I definitely urge you to have a look at that if you get a chance. Aladdin has embraced My Learner ID, and there's a short video to actually look at how you can maintain the records from My Learner ID across the school years on the Aladdin framework. If you have Aladdin in your school on software, you can also generate a report at the end of the year that records and that keeps a record of the strategies children have selected for their learning during that school year. And it's a very nice way to add, I think, to the school report and to give insight into actually how children are learning. So that's certainly worth considering. So there's an acknowledgement, I think, in My Learner ID here, and an absolute, I suppose, clarity about what the goals and purposes are of the programme. So that X over there is for content. It's got nothing to do with content or curricula in learning at all as such. My Learner ID is very much looking at, well, who am I as a learner? There's two parts to the programme, to the structure of the programme for delivery and implementation in the classroom. Who am I as a learner? So who is this little person sitting in front of me? And how do I learn best? And, you know, that is what My Learner ID offers you in your classroom. And it's an absolute essential dimension and perspective to have on learners today when you consider how diverse our classrooms are, how much differentiation we're supposed to be able to do. Though goodness knows it's becoming more, you know, challenging every day to do just that. And the key things that challenge us in classrooms aren't often the standards around actually teaching. We've become very effective at how we teach and the methodologies associated with teaching the curriculum. The things that often stop us are the struggling learner, the challenging learner, the child who's having difficulty with learning, the child who's having difficulty with peer relationships, the child who's finding it difficult to find themselves and find themselves and locate themselves within the classroom. My Learner ID will give you a perspective on this. If you never met your class group and you had access to the My Learner ID pupil profiles at the beginning of the school year, you would know the child that's coming into you in September. You would see them from the My Learner ID record. It's a powerful record and glimpse into the world of the child, both from, you know, the personal perspective of themselves, who they are, what they think about school, what they think about their world, what they think about their strengths, what they would aspire to in terms of strengths, very much giving you a glimpse of that, and very much giving you a glimpse of their levels or absences of self-awareness around learning. To what extent can they look at themselves as learners and kind of engage in a process of thinking about being a learner and evaluating themselves as a learner. That sort of insight is absolutely invaluable, and for that reason really is very important. So the structure of My Learner ID is in two parts. So part one focuses on the who of the learner, and part two focuses on how do I learn best. So the who of the learner is looking very much at the world of the learner. So it's looking at that about me a little bit. And what's different, I suppose, about this about me a little bit in My Learner ID is that it progresses and it moves across the school years. So it develops, it doesn't remain stationary and static and ask the child the same question every year in September about themselves, their likes, their dislikes. It moves on across the school years in a developmental framework that gives you a rich picture of children over time. So, and the changes in children over time, their understandings of themselves over time. I had a very interesting conversation with a teacher in a school in Newmarket and Fergus here in County Clare who's using My Learner ID in her school, and she has a child with autism in her class. And when I met her initially and we were working with the book in school and we were working with the series, she came to me in frustration one day and she said to me, you know, he's all about cars. Everything is about cars in My Learner ID. Everything. I can't get him to move on from cars. It's all about cars. And, you know, and I listened and we had a chat about it and we talked about autism and the fixation and the fixedness of mindset around certain things and the lack of flexibility and the tend to obsess on different things. And I suggested to her, you know, that is an authentic reflection of where this child is right now at this time. And even though, you know, you're looking in over the shoulder and it doesn't seem like there's much movement, that's where he's at this time. So I met her there at one stage before Christmas. And yes, the little boy in the class had actually moved on. He'd moved on to something new. And, you know, that little section on About Me just captures that. It captures that kind of progression or not over time around elements and concepts. And I know there's a lot of programs, lots of elements of programs that do About Me, but you couldn't have a My Learner ID record without a bit About Me, obviously, in it. So it's done in a very different way with open-ended prompts and ways of inviting in children, you know, and their views on their world that are very much led by themselves. There's a big emphasis in strength-based profiling within My Learner ID, and there's a section in each of the class levels on my strengths. And my strengths isn't all about just writing about what I'm great at or what I'm good at. It's also about looking at the challenges, and it's also about looking at the aspirations for, you know, children as they get older around character strengths and around strengths in others. So the 5th and 6th class Learner ID, My Strengths section, for example, are linked to character strength lessons based on Segal's 24 character types and character strengths. And it's really about choosing a character strength that might suit your class in 5th class or 6th class, might reflect you know, a concern that you may have as a teacher, or a particular strength that you feel, you know, is something that would be aspirational for your class group. So perhaps if children weren't being kind enough, or if children weren't being tolerant enough of each other, or, you know, if children weren't being honest enough with each other, it might be a focus for a few weeks, that particular character strength within My Learner ID in that particular year group. So my strengths really is around, again, the positivity, identifying what children come to school with, what are their assets, what are their strengths. And I was on the radio there on the Claire Byrne show a few weeks back, talking about My Learner ID, but one of the points that I suppose I was at pains to emphasise is, you know, the investment we make in deficit education in Ireland, and we do. We've so many jobs, we've so many programs, with so many initiatives and interventions, and rightly so, to address deficits in children. But we need a bit of balance around all of this, and we need to be looking at what strengths children come in the door to school at. So instead of profiling our infants on deficit measures, we should also be balancing that with a focus on what is it that they're coming to school with that are natural strengths, because at the age of 15 or 16, we will be going back to the drawing board to look at the strengths of each child as we look to see where their future may be. So it's really important, I think, to probe strengths, to capture strengths, and to invest in the tracking of strengths across the school system. Very important to build that rich profile of children over time. There's a lovely section in each of the pupil record books called My World, Welcome to My World. And I put in the quote in the 5th class book there, and that's just the chapter section from the 5th class pupil record book from Yeats. I've spread my dreams under your feet, tread softly because you tread on my dreams. And the idea with this was really to just give a glimpse into the worldview of the child sitting in front of you there. What is it that takes their interest? What sort of imagination, imaginative ideas do they have? What sort of creativity do they bring in the door to education? And can we capture that within My World? And, you know, I think particularly where we have children who, you know, might find English difficult as a first language, or who might be non-verbal in communication generally, or who might find the world of representation so much easier than the world of words or written words. This section within My Learner ID offers an opportunity for those children to represent their voice in a really authentic way. So again, you know, it's a lovely way of looking in over the shoulder at the child that might be a source of confusion or puzzle or, you know, concern in your classroom, where you just might get a glimpse of their worldview. And that's what it is. It's their worldview. It's neither right nor wrong. It just represents their worldview, and it has to be accepted at that level by those who choose to review, you know, that glimpse and those thoughts and those shared views. Then there's a section about school. And when I commenced My Learner ID, initially the development of this in 2015, there was very little research done on the school experience in Irish schools, except for the use of American surveys that were being kind of administered to children in schools, and, you know, they were survey data you know, and I would, I suppose, have had a lot of difficulties with that as an authentic measure of the school experience, because children with surveys often find, you know, survey data difficult to position. So, you know, if they're given a choice, you'll often find on a scale of 1 to 5, they'll go for 3s, no matter what the question is, because they're not really sure, and they're not sure what the person beside them is writing down. So the reliability of survey data actually with children is quite limited at a school level, at a younger level. So I wanted to kind of tap into the experience of school and the thoughts about school and what ideas children had about school and the experience of school within this particular part of part 1 of the Who of the Learner. And I noticed there last year UCD has invested in a very significant kind of a study in a number of schools in Dublin in partnership with the NCCA, actually about school and about the school experience. And they report every so often. So the most recent report there was the anxiety children are reporting around standardized testing prior to COVID. But it's interesting to just grasp, I suppose, the concepts and the ideas about school. And I've broadened out the school section. You'll see, you know, my favorite lunch, and you'll see, you know, what I like to do in the yard, and you'll see what's essential in school, what's swappable in school, what's a luxury in school. And it's just tapping the school experience and tapping the perception of school, you know, from the perspective of the child. So in the context of tonight, and because the session is so short, I can't go through each of the year levels and each of the content sections within each year level, but broadly speaking, the questions that are kind of explored in part 1 of the Who of the Learner are questions that look at what are my successes and challenges in learning, what are my personal interests, what motivates me, what's my internal reality, what skills in learning do I bring to the learning context, what changes with me over time, what are my perceptions about school? Are we really listening to my voice in class? Do we really hear what I'm saying? And, you know, that might be through, you know, drawings for some children. It may not be through words. What strengths do I aspire to? So it's just to give you a sense of, you know, what's covered in that Who section. Part 2 of the programme then looks at learning how to learn. And this is, you know, the section that I have entitled My Learning Ways. And this is a section that gives children the opportunity to think about their approach to learning, think about the skills for learning, and think about, you know, the strategies that might work for them and help them become more effective in their learning. So when I'm in schools and when I'm working with teachers, I often take the example of, you know, attention or organisation. If we say to a child, you know, can you please be more organised, or you have to get more organised, you know, what does that actually mean for the child? What does organisation mean for the 10-year-old sitting there? Do they actually really understand what that is, or do we need to deconstruct that and give them examples of what organisation is and let them consider where they are with regards to organisation in the classroom? And then too, when we think about strategies around things like organisation or attention or learning behaviours or memory or even listening, we often, as a teacher, have a particular way of doing things. We often adopt a particular style or a particular approach. And, you know, we have lots of neurodiverse learners in classrooms, huge diversity in classrooms. So, for example, you know, highlighting, for example, on a page, highlighting a sentence or highlighting words may not particularly be in any way effective or helpful to a particular child. So the idea with My Learning Ways is to look at the learning ways that we know are important for effective learning in classrooms, to deconstruct them for children, to give children the language and the vocabulary associated with these learning ways, and then for them to consider how they're going to choose a strategy that will work for them. And those strategies become their personalized, let's say, learning ways, their personalized ways of learning in the classroom. So you can see there's a little curiosity checklist down here for first class. And, curiosity is introduced with activities, games and poems within the My Learner ID record book. Lots of activities looking at curiosity and extending curiosity so that it's a very real, tangible construct that children are looking at. And there's a little checklist, do I like to know more? Yes or no? And there's a little, I suppose, insight into the behaviours associated with curiosity or attention or imagination or collaboration or listening effectively. What does that mean for the child? And it's asking the child to consider these and to consider themselves with regards to those behaviours, and then looking at the strategies that can help and practicing the activities and the tasks to embed those in practice, and using then the strategy wheels and other techniques later on to embed them in practice and generalise them across learning. So my learner ID, that part too is really, really important. And first class, second class first class looks at curiosity. Actually, first class looks at listening, I think, listening, imagination and collaboration. I think second class looks at grit and perseverance, looks at imagination, creativity. There's three learning ways looked at each level. Third class looks at a kind of an introduction at the learning ways that follow in fourth, fifth and sixth class. And fourth class looks at attention and looks at learning behaviours needed for effective learning. Fifth class looks at memory and mindset, and sixth class looks at organisation and metacognition, with a view to equipping children with those skills for secondary school and moving on. There are other things in the My Learning Ways section. There are, the reflect stickers for the beginning, the middle and the end point of lessons. And, I think these are really important, and the schools that, were shut during COVID used these a lot to connect with home, and I thought they can be used so effectively and so well. So they're kind of reflect and review prompts, and the idea really is, as children get older, that they're encouraged to apply these to their learning. It could be to something they've done, it could be something that they're doing in school, it could be a project that they're doing in school, it could be some homework that they've done. And really the idea is to get them to think about what it is that they've done at the beginning, at the midpoint and at the end of their learning, and to make a record of it. And what's interesting about the use of the reflect stickers in schools is how alive the copybooks become, and how engaged and alive children become around other learners around them and their responses. So you're picking up copybooks and you're looking through children's own voice and responses to the tasks and challenges that have been set for them in learning, whether it's in the class or whether it's at home. Lovely way for parents to connect as well. And I often say to myself and to others that are listening to me, the only copybooks I ever kept from my own children going through school were the copybooks that really kind of let me see the child at that particular stage of development. I remember one of my boys writing a little story about the sausage man, and we kept that copy because it was really a glimpse into him at that age and stage in first class. And the use of the reflect stickers can be very powerful in terms of giving a sense of where that child is around their learning, and to connect with home as well. So much more interesting for a parent to pick up a response to a child around a learning task than always having to just oversee the learning task. So again, it's that kind of reflect, and the use of these reflect prompts that's so important. There's another school that I'm working with over the years, and they have put all of the reflect prompts actually on A4 pages, and they've put them on desks in classrooms to prompt children to use them throughout the day. There are A0 or A1 kind of copies of all of the prompts in the teacher resource book that can be put on the side of the filing cabinet for you to remember that they're there as well, and that's very handy when you're up there and as busy as you are. So yeah, they're there, and I think they're a lovely little added dimension to encouraging children to be more active in the learning process. There's also over here, you might see the dialogue bubbles, and they're in the fourth, fifth and sixth class books, and really they're pre and post measures of how effective the learning ways have been for you with your children. So before you might start into, for example, organisation, the children are invited to fill in, let's think about being organised. And they fill in the little dialogue bubbles, tell me, when is it easy for you to be organised? When is it difficult for you to be organised? Have you any strategy for organisation? What would help me, do you think, to be more organised, etc., etc. And I had a very nice teacher up in Dublin saying to me that when he did this with his class in fifth class, he realised how disorganised he was himself, and that he couldn't believe that he learned so much about himself and his organisational skills actually from doing this. So, but that's the pre-measure. Then there's 15 weeks on organisation, and then there's a post-measure, and it's a qualitative process way of looking at this. You'll also capture pre and post measure in terms of the evaluation strategies that children use and pick out for themselves. But it's a very handy little way of measuring process in classrooms, process in learning, and really tell you what children have or haven't acquired from use of the programme. So the types of kind of things looked at in that second part of the programme, what learning strategies work for me, what are my responsibilities in learning, what language or vocabulary do I have to talk about learning, what independence do I have in learning, what are my goals in learning, how do I reflect, can I self-evaluate, do I work well with others, for example, can I use rubrics, can I design rubrics, can I develop rubrics, and that's part of the 5th class programme where they develop a rubric for looking at homework and evaluating homework. The teacher resource book is there, the little evaluation booklet is there for each of the class levels. There are planning schemes for you, because this is, I suppose, an added dimension to what you might already be doing in school. Broadly falls under assessment, might be delivered part 1, the who of the learner, across the curriculum. So it can be delivered through SPHE, for example, can be linked in with English, art, and there's links offered, curricular links for each page in part 1 of My Learner ID. And for part 2, there's an actual scheme done out for the year with objectives, with the absolute delivery of what you do and where you do, to guide you in effective delivery of the programme for that second part. There are lesson plans, there are video lessons, there's pre and post intervention tools, there's an evaluation booklet, and there are resources. So really, My Learner ID is around the customisation and personalisation of the process of becoming and being a learner. It's about empowerment in learning, and it's about authentic assessment and dynamic assessment, because it's changing all the time across the school years. And I would say to you, and I think it's hugely important, it is a critical communicative and educational framework for partnership with parents. This is an easy, very visible, very visual, very tangible framework for parents to work with. I have parents in the strategy wheels in the workplace at home. They're picking them up in the homework journals. They're asking questions about them. They're also equipping parents with strategies, for helping children around attention, around memory, before they're coming into the school at all, asking and expressing concern. They've had a first effort at trying to address some of those difficulties within the home setting. And for those parents that are in a position to help, and there are many parents who just often need a nudge and a nod and a framework that they can actually implement, it is really a very powerful framework for that purpose, and for empowering parents too around the whole thing. So just to give you some broader context on it, My Learner ID has been evaluated on over 500 children. It has received funding by the Teaching Council for an independent national evaluation, which is ongoing. It's available as Gaeilge Mission Mar Aulamore, which captures, I think, maybe the intent of the programme, and much easier for us all. Mission Mar Aulamore, me as a learner, myself as a learner. That really captures the essence of the programme just so much more easily than the unfamiliar terminology of learner identity or My Learner ID. Mission Mar Aulamore. So it's those of us who get it instantly. It's in use in over 100 classrooms in Ireland at the moment, and it's also in use in 2 European schools, as far as I'm aware, one in Belgium and one in Dubai, with children who left Ireland with My Learner ID. I received an award there by the Psychological Society of Ireland for the most significant contribution to psychology practice with My Learner ID, and was delighted to get that award in recognition from peers. And an online summer course, which should be available across the year from September onwards, for My Learner ID. That was approved by the Department of Education and Science and will be running this summer for the next few summers, but it was evaluated by the inspectorate last year, and the inspectorate involved stayed on the course for the entire duration of the summer and gave it a glowing golden standard, and was highly complimentary of the originality and significant contribution that My Learner ID has made to his understanding of what learning is all about. So just to kind of give you a sense of that, to get started in your school, if you're interested in doing this, I suppose the first thing I would say to you is put My Learner ID on your book list. And that in itself has been a challenge in schools. Where do we put it on the book list? And I know in one of my schools in the early days, it was put in under other. And I said, no, you've got to put that in under assessment. And some schools put it in under SPHE. But if you don't have it, you're not going to use it. And this is really part of children's assessment portfolios, assessment profiles across the school years. It is and should be considered a critical component of holistic assessment. It should be for every learner, and it should enable the empowerment of every learner in your classroom over time. I definitely would recommend training, and that's not to, you know, tie people down or to assume you can't read TRB books or anything, but, you know, I think the underlying training, giving you a really good sense of, you know, what do you do if a child colours in black as their favourite colour? Let's have a chat about that. How do we deal with that? What do we do if a child is ticking I'm great, 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 great at everything? What's my response to that? They're the sort of questions and kind of dilemmas and challenges around practice that are useful to talk with others around training. So last year I offered, and the year before, summer online training at the very minimal cost that I possibly could, that would cover the platform cost and the moderator cost. And a very large number of teachers did the training actually last year. And if any of you have access to any of the teachers there, I have testimonials from them all. The feedback was really, really positive on My Learner ID. It was really like every single teacher that did the programme across the board reported back on it that they really enjoyed the online programme. I designed it in such a way that it leads you as a teacher through the programme and the ideas. So at a teacher level, you're doing some of the concepts, and then you can branch off on the second day into whatever class level you're teaching. So the summer programme follows a route. If you're a first class teacher, you'll do first class, you'll look at the first class programme in detail. After Easter, I will be conducting and offering a webinar for first and second class, for third and fourth class, and for fifth and sixth class, April 14th, April 21st, April 28th. I have to also say the EDCO reps are fantastic. They're highly skilled in delivering really good in-service on My Learner ID, so you're very welcome to contact them too. But I will be going through those on webinars. And the education centres, you might be aware, I've been doing Learning to be a Learner series there with Tralee, Monaghan, Ennis, and somewhere else. There's a fourth education centre involved in that, in the educational centre partnerships. And I looked at memory there last week, memory strategies, and there were over 470 teachers registered for that, and over 380 teachers actually zipped in on the day. So there's a lot of interest in Learning to be a Learner, and education centres nationally will be setting up communities of practice in September where schools trying out and working with My Learner ID will have the support of each other. And so if you're interested in a school in participating in that, please touch base with me, or touch base with the education centres Blackrock, Kildare, Mayo, Limerick, Clare, Kerry, Monaghan, and any other education centre that you feel can support it. I'm very happy to to touch base with them and see if we can set it up there. So that's kind of where that's at. Just connect online as well if you can. So you've the local reps online. You have My Learner ID. Facebook at the moment is probably the best way to catch me. And for updates on things, I'll certainly be updating there, or at Twitter. The website is there, but it is being updated at the moment. So there will in time be a more kind of active running record of what's happening on the website page, but it's not there just yet. I got a phone call today from Julie in EDCO, and she said to me to announce to you all that all participants this evening will receive sample record books from EDCO to your schools. So just to make sure that you have recorded your school with Julie, and she said that she will be sending on sample records to you, inspection books for you to have a look at and to get a sense of it in your hand. And I think once you have it in your hand, you'll see its potential benefit. I have loads of testimonials. I haven't put them all together yet, but the strongest testimonials in my view come from the children. And I was in one lovely school in Limerick, a very disadvantaged school, where they're using My Learner ID. And I had a little boy in the school. I think he was from Turkey or from Syria, I'm not sure. He was certainly somewhere abroad, and he had very little English. But when I came in, I had met the class group for the second time. And they knew that I had been the author and that I was the author of My Learner ID. And that little boy came up to me and asked me, when was I writing a novel? and I had to explain to him that, you know, I wasn't writing any novels, but absolutely so loved the My Learner ID concept. And when I stand back and look at the response by children to My Learner ID, I think it is an absolute acknowledgement of the need for us in schools to give children space to voice their opinions, their thoughts, their ideas about learning. It's really, that's what it is, and the idea that it's owned by them and that it's not marked, it's all very appealing to children, that it is something special for them. And one of the things we're missing from today is, you know, a glimpse into just how dynamic that energy is with children and My Learner ID. And I'd urge you to have a look at the video online, or contact me to contact schools that are using My Learner ID, and they'll give you a glimpse and they'll give you a sense of that. I've had conversations in schools where I've had school principals saying, don't come near me, don't need to talk to me about My Learner ID, the children love it. The children love it, the children speak volumes. And many of the schools are schools that have exemplary practice. They're very effective schools in their own right, and I draw attention there to Fairfield School. In its last school evaluation, it got absolutely no recommendations, and it was one of the first schools to take on My Learner ID and to give it a very good kind of thorough kind of overview in the pilot run. And you know, you can see John there noting that, you know, he really feels it made a huge difference to his school community, both parents and pupils, demonstrating what they've learned from it. Equally, the very disadvantaged DESH school settings, where sometimes resources and interventions we have just fail because they mightn't be sufficiently, you know, flexible enough, or because, you know, it can be very difficult with language barriers. When I met the principal of Thornley School 3 years ago, she had just gone through a school evaluation and was very upset over the lack of visibility of success that the school had achieved in the measures that were being used to measure success. So she was complaining, and rightly, that the standardised measures of literacy and numeracy failed to capture the progression the school had made in its entire population of non-English speaking native, you know, children, all children whose first language was not English in the school. And the massive significant progress that their infant teachers and teachers across the school had made, but that the measures used to track that progress simply weren't sensitive enough to do that. And she really welcomed My Learner ID with open arms. She felt it gave great authenticity to the significant measures and improvements and progressions in learning that she knew were taking place in her school, but couldn't really find a tool to kind of capture that. So I'd like to thank you all for bearing with me for a little bit longer than I had thought I might be, and to suggest to you, if you have any questions. I don't know if I have an active interface here. I'm not sure that I do, but you're very welcome to email me if you have any questions, or to connect with me on Facebook, or indeed to connect with EDCO. So I'll maybe hand back to you, Rochelle, at this point, and just say thank you to everybody. Have a lovely Easter next week and a well-deserved definite break, and hopefully we're coming back to hopefully we're coming back to a bit more sanity going forward. If you have any questions about My Learner ID, please feel welcome to get in touch. Thank you very much.